Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from CASH alumni. CASH alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
Maybe we've gone from somebody who rants and raves at your manager when they're struggling to cope to somebody who just goes, yeah, okay. Those kind of behaviour changes can be really indicative of it all getting a little bit too much. It's a stress that all of us are at risk of. Compassion fatigue, too much giving, vicarious trauma, too much taking on board, and then burnout literally when we're just gone.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
I'm Sass Boucher, director and co-founder with Kate of SelfCare Psychology. In my other work worlds, I am a practicing counsellor and psychotherapist with my own practice, and I also lecture at Collier University on the Master's Counselling course. So busy, really busy.
I am Kate Collier. I am co-founder and director of SelfCare Psychology along with Sass. And my everyday role is that I am head of learning and employee development at a regional charity called Black Country Women's Aid. However, I am here because of my role at SelfCare Psychology. And my interest in this work really comes from my own personal experiences of working in the world of caring for the people and that being problematic and having impacts on me and my health.
Like Kate said, our message is really simple. If you're working with or volunteering in a role which focuses on supporting others, cross-sector, so that's kind of health, education, early years, social care and health, then there's risks to us. And that's really important to be aware of. Also to have an awareness of the remedies and the rewards. And that came about because of when I did my master's in counselling and psychology, having a background in working in domestic violence, I kind of thought that that would be the area that I would do my research around. But I suddenly realised that my links to social work and as a practice educator working with social work students and also coming from a domestic violence background, so sort of being old enough to be aware of pre-MARAC, high-risk IDFA role. And as a counsellor, we're all listening to very similar things, sitting with very similar pain and distress from people. But we've actually got really different ways of being able to feel supported in that work. And the issue is that if we don't find support, then we can very easily, I very fondly use the term break, because that's how I call myself when I kind of broke a bit without putting labels onto that. But being the kind of sort of irritatingly positive person that I can be, I also wanted to know what we could do about it. So the research involved talking to social workers, people working in high-risk DV and other counsellors, because as a counsellor, I have to sign up for clinical supervision to stay safe and practice effectively. I wanted to know what was going on for folks and what was hurting us, but more importantly, what we can do as individuals, as well as, institutions, local authorities and our organisations to keep ourselves well, because I generally find that most of us do this kind of work because we like being with other people, not because of any huge pay packets at the end of the month. There's going to be some common denominators there. So having worked with Kate previously, we kind of got together following my research, and Kate put her creative brain to the themes and findings of the research to create some models that we can talk about in a little bit on that describe what we're at risk of, but also what can protect us, what those remedies are, but also the rewards, because there's a really good reason that we do what we do.
It came from a very personal place why I'm interested in this and where it developed from, in that, as I mentioned, I did have my own experience of suffering health issues, actually physical health issues, because of the work that I did, which I would have thought at the time. It was something that came to me because I had to take a step back because of the health conditions that I developed. And that reflection time in that space made me realise how much of the impact my work was having on me. I have a background of working in domestic abuse, but also in prisons with high-risk women and with women who have suffered multiple disadvantage. So we're thinking women who have substance misuse issues, mental health issues, offending behaviours and childhood abuse, whole range of different factors, which is really traumatic to work with. Not as much as it is to experience it, but it still has an impact on the person that is sitting with that on a day-to-day basis. And it really kind of hit that home for me, having to take that time out and reflect. And it made me realise that across my entire professional career, having qualified originally as a social worker, having later done further qualifications, and then becoming a manager, actually of quite a large team who was working with these women, that I had never really considered that had never been promoted to me, the idea that there is an impact and that we should be doing something about it. So when I hooked up with Sass and she was sharing this amazing research with me, it was like revelatory. I was like, this is amazing. And then it explained so much of what I have experienced, what I see my team experiencing. And for me, that's why I'm so passionate about this. And we do that outside of the main roles that we do, because we think it's so important that, you know, all of the really skilled, talented people who are passionate about working with others, because actually you are at your most vulnerable if you are someone who really, really cares, then we think it's so important that those people have the opportunity to learn about this stuff, to understand the risks, and to really appreciate those positives as well, because that's how we keep people healthy, safe, and in the workplace, and not burnt out, jaded, and leaving for the work. So we want our most valuable people, the people who really, really care and are passionate, to stay with us and to keep support with the people who are doing the work that they love. And that's why I care about it so much.
We're doing a wellbeing survey around job satisfaction and wellbeing. And I wonder how correlated it is, that risk of burnout, of doing too much, to the motivation, faith that you need to have to want to support people with those things in the first place.
I think, again, there's so much there, isn't there? Because ultimately, you know, when I was training as a counsellor and as a psychotherapist, and the relationship that I hope to facilitate for my clients, that they feel safe, that they feel supported, that they feel heard, is what enables, hopefully, that personal growth. That's kind of at the core of what we do. And tapping into what you're saying there, I don't know why I was surprised. I was kind of really taken aback that we don't give that to ourselves and each other in a professional environment. I was like, wow, wouldn't it be great if our managers managed us in a person-centered way, where they sit and listen and don't judge, and can be really authentic and honest with us. So I think that's one part of it, that we kind of give all our skills to the folks that we're working with. And I'm conscious of not using, you know, just one term like client, patient, student, service user, because we all use different words to honour the people that we work with. But it just surprised me, really, that it was a bit of a shocker that we don't look after each other in that same way. I think also, if you're talking about motivation, I guess it just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That most of us feel maybe a calling or an affinity, or we are a phrase that Kate and I don't like using too much, but sort of classed as wounded healers. We have lived experience, or we are indeed living experience, which was a phrase that Kate and I heard quite recently, which I think is so applicable in our work. That's, in some ways, you know, that empathy that we extend to others is probably as fine-tuned as it is because of our experiences. But by the same token, it's that empathy that can really, one part of the stuff that can really hurt us doing the jobs that we do, because we're putting ourselves into somebody else's frame of reference so firmly that we're feeling their stuff. And I'll sort of hand over to Kate just to talk to you about our umbrella, because we very much talk about this as a collective of concepts and symptoms. I don't believe that compassion fatigue, for example, plus trauma equals burnout or stress. Kate can go into those a little bit more for us, but we're also human as well. And that's really important to remember, that we're also dealing with all the stuff ourselves as human beings.
There's just something I wanted to briefly add to that. And that was around the fact, I think one of the things that often within the helping professions and when we work with people, we fundamentally misunderstand to our detriment, is that boundaries and being able to have a really clear sense of our boundaries and applying them to others and to ourselves is somehow negative and is somehow not a positive thing to do. And there's some great work by Brené Brown, the social work researcher from America. She's done some work around compassionate people and what it takes to be truly, truly compassionate. And the thing that she came up with as the golden thread through all of that research was actually boundaries, the ability to apply boundaries, because then that allows you to remain in the present, to not become resentful, and to give of yourself in the best way possible, and to be the best you that you can be for the people that you work for. And I think that's a really important way to reframe it, because I do think that when we think about motivation and why people who really care sometimes are impacted the most, that can be a big part of it. Thinking that giving all of myself, all of the time, in every single way is how I achieve the most change and the most impact. And we know that actually, whilst it seems common sense, isn't true. But coming on to the umbrellas and why that might be the case, we have our umbrella, which is what we put all of our fondly named droplets of doom underneath. And these are the things that we consider that if you work with people, and the research bears out, you are most at risk of. And some of them are really unique to working within roles where you work with people, and some of them are much more generic. They then together make up the spectrum of things that you can be at risk of. So first of all, we have stress, which is obviously very generic and very well understood, although I feel sometimes underappreciated as a word, as a concept, as a diagnosis, in fact, because we use that word so much, don't we? I'm a bit stressed and having a stressful day. But when we're talking about stress, it actually is something which has both a psychological and a physical impact on our body. It can affect the way we work. It can contribute to all sorts of illnesses. It's about the regulation of our body. I mean, it's huge, isn't it? It's a massive issue, but it's something that we kind of tidy away with that little word stress. But that is something that we are all at risk of in all of our lives. But that definitely comes into something that you can be at risk of within these roles. We then have our compassion fatigue, which is we like to think of as you being empty. So you have a tank of empathy to give. You have so much, and that is finite. It is not sort of somehow a miracle and you can just keep giving and giving and giving and you won't run out. So when we get to a point where we have given so much that we are empty or very close to empty, as some would imply we can't actually get to empty, and Gabor Mate recently was saying that this is more of a concept than like stress, not so much diagnosis, but more of a concept which different people have different ideas about. But for us personally, we consider it to be that fatigue of giving. I've given so much, I have nothing left to give. I've become an empty vessel, essentially. And again, I do think it's one of those things that in a common sense world, we would understand and appreciate about ourselves if we were to apply kindness, grace, and sensibility to our own well-being. But we often don't. So if we were to get in a car right now and I was to drive from the Midlands to Scotland on a half of a tank of petrol, and I stopped on the way there because I refused to fill up with fuel, and someone would just stop, say, okay, what's wrong? And I would say, oh, well, I ran out of petrol. Like, where have they come from? The Midlands. And now I'm in like Dundee trying to get to the Highlands or something. Well, why didn't you fill up your tank? Oh, I thought I could just keep going. You'd be like, that is honestly ridiculous. But we often do sometimes have this sense that we can do that to ourselves. And then we move along to vicarious trauma. And this is where we experience trauma through hearing other people's trauma. So it's not that we have experienced it ourselves. It's not that we're there when it happens. It's that we sit with them, we hear their pain, and that pain, usually as a cumulative effect over time, has an impact on us. So we begin to experience the symptoms of trauma despite it not being our own. And that is more likely to happen, actually, when we have an intersection of our own personal history of trauma, and then we're also listening to others. So there are things that can increase the risk factors, make it more likely, but it can happen to anybody who is sitting with someone else's pain. And finally, we have burnout, which is really sort of end of the spectrum stuff and is slightly different in that it is about us just getting to the end of the road and having that professional cynicism, complete exhaustion, not being able to continue to function anymore. And that's a concept which was characterised by Christine Mazalek, and she's recently looked at that again. And it's something where we think it's really important that people understand it properly, because it's often described as being, you've just had too much work. And because you've had too much work, you've burnt out. When in fact, what she identifies and other researchers in the field identify is that there are 6 really key factors that come into play where burnout is present. And I think, Sass, that's something that you'll be able to tell us a bit more about, because you love a bit of Christine Mazalek.
It's just really important, isn't it, that we use these words appropriately. I've heard somebody said, I've burnt out by lunchtime, and maybe not. I mean, you might be, but maybe there's a bit more to it than that. And there's so much narrative out there about burnout. And actually, it's not just about being busy. It's about work overload. It's about our individual lack of control over our workload. It's about the insufficient rewards from our workload. And we're talking about a thank you. We're not talking about a delivery of gold bullion. We're talking about that breakdown of community, which clearly, we all know that the pandemic had a huge impact on that peer support, that ability to feel that we can belong and talk to each other. Absence of fairness. And I think I only have to use the word resources, and most of us would understand how that might come into play in our workplace. And then there's value conflicts, which is also sometimes talked about around a moral conflict, moral distress. But if we're doing a job because we fundamentally want to do the best for the people that we're working with, but something is stopping us doing that, either policy or health and safety or budget, then that hurts, that grates, that's like, really important. So burnout is not specific to our roles. It's just another little gem that sits under the umbrella that we are definitely at risk of. And I read something somebody had written about our professional trauma and fatigue umbrella, which is the term that we came up with. And they said every organisation needs a little green brolly protecting us from this stuff that's going on. And that just feels like a nice way of thinking about this stuff, that actually it's a collection of stuff that can impact us. It doesn't have to, and there's no formula. We need that awareness, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I actually used to call my previous line manager my umbrella, because he was the one who protected me from all of the stuff coming, and then I would just feed up the things that were like necessary. So I think a line manager in some respects is a good choice to have an umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of comes into play with one of the pillars, doesn't it, around that supervision and that awareness, that actually what can we do to protect ourselves. And I just also want to flag up here that obviously this is like a whirlwind trip of concepts that are like, researched, but just to have that awareness that it's generally somebody else who spots it in us first. It's generally somebody else who'll notice that our behaviour's changing. And they'll sort of realise that maybe we've gone from somebody who rants and raves at your manager when they're struggling to cope, to somebody who just goes, yeah, okay. Those kind of behaviour changes can be really indicative of it all getting a little bit too much. It's that mixture, isn't it, that feels dangerous to me. It's a stress that all of us are at risk of. Compassion fatigue, too much giving, vicarious trauma, too much taking on board, and then burnout, literally when we're just gone.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
So I wondered if you could just summarize the 5 pillars of protection for our audience who don't know what it is, and then we can dive deeper into each of them individually.
Absolutely delighted. And I think it's really important to just back this up with where it's come from. And obviously it's come from, the research project I did. That was small. It comes from a huge literature review. And it also, 7 years now, Kate and I have been really focused on this area of work. So we've worked with a lot of people as well who bring their stuff to us. With regards to experience, but the pillars of protection are what we see as protecting us, going towards protecting us. We absolutely understand that you can't self-care your way out of burnout. Similarly, a bath isn't going to buffer trauma, but there are themes that we've turned into the pillars, and they are awareness, supervision, peer support, trauma-informed, and self-care. Those are the 5 that we firmly believe, and the evidence suggests, can make a real difference. Interchangeably, it's not like we have to be excellent at all of them. The pillars can be such a helpful tool to look at and think, do you know what? I'm really not doing what I used to do, looking after myself, or, my supervisor, my line manager, I'm not kind of getting what I used to get. So giving us that control and autonomy to try and tweak the stuff just to help us carry on doing what we do a bit more.
How can practitioners sort of spot the signs of professional trauma and fatigue, both within themselves and also those that they work with?
The biggest thing to understand here is that there isn't that formula. There isn't something that you can go, okay, as a manager, this is really helpful. I can have this tick box. And if these people do this, then they have professional trauma and fatigue. And unfortunately, as is the case so often in life, that is not something we can do. We don't have that ones that will help diagnose people in such a way. However, I think as Sass alluded to, the biggest thing you can look for is changes in behaviour, changes in the way people feel about their work, changes in the way they interact. I think knowing yourself, knowing your colleagues, knowing your team if you're a manager are really important ways that you can look out for this. Because all of these things have different symptoms. they manifest differently in different people. I mean, if we just take one of these things and think of stress, for example, stress is something that can look like shouting for one person, it can look like crying quietly for someone else, can look like wanting to talk to everyone and completely trying to get away from their work, and look like completely focused on the work and not talking to anybody for somebody else. So I think it is about that change in behaviour. We do like to recommend the Profile Professional Quality of Life Scale, which is a free-to-use tool that is licensed by a charity. It's ProQual, so PROQOL. And that is the tool that is used most commonly, and it's international. And if people do that, it gives them scores related to the impact of these things on them currently from their work. And also, which we'll go into a little bit later, and actually links what you were saying, Dawn, around satisfaction in your recent survey, and passion and satisfaction. So it is a bit of a rounded way to look at it, because the other thing we hear a lot is that people don't have the language to talk about this stuff. Very often, if we start to feel these things, it can be so hard to articulate and so hard to put your finger on and to know yourself what's happening. So we like to recommend the tool because it gives something sort of impartial and separate from their workplace. They can go away, they can completely look at, and it gives them something to take back and discuss with maybe their partner, their family, their friends, their managers, their workplace, whoever they're comfortable with. And it gives them a language to do that with. Because as you say, that can be the hardest part, actually, acknowledging it might be a problem or recognizing it. And I think for us, it isn't just about that with awareness. It's not about knowing that you're becoming unwell. It's also about not getting unwell by being aware of what could happen and consequently putting things in place that protect and support you. Early intervention is really important. I mean, I have become unwell because of this stuff, and it can be quite a long road back. It's a lot of work. I would much rather that people went, oh, I'm aware this stuff could happen, so let me really put some effort and let's prioritise the stuff that might stop me getting there. Because you can't guarantee it, can you? But let's really try and put some effort into doing the things that mean that I won't become that ill in the first place.
How do you get people to make that leap? If someone is a person who is intrinsically motivated to help people and put other people first, how do you get them to be comfortable saying, I need to do this for me?
Do you know what, Dawn? If we knew the answer to that one, then we'd be incredibly wealthy, wouldn't we? But I think I just think it's so tricky. And I think the awareness pillar also alludes to that culture. We need to create a culture where it's okay to do that. Our employers need to create a culture that it's okay to do that. I was just reading an article on burnout before we came on to talk to you, and basically, societally, structurally, to say I'm struggling is seen as a weakness. We know that in so many areas of our lives, and specifically, if you think the power that our organisations have, they probably pay our rent, our mortgages, so to be able to hold your hands up and go, do you know what, I'm struggling, is a really tough thing for anybody to do, I think, because do you know what, they might go and find somebody who isn't, or somebody who's fresh into the role. So, we're really needing a cultural awareness, a cultural shift. But I really think peer support is vital here as well, about being able to support each other to do that, to be able to listen to each other and to find those pathways to seeking some help.
I think for me, there's also, personally, and in my experience, there is something about a perspective shift. You can keep in mind the belief that the most important thing to you is supporting other people, but shift your perspective to believe that you do that best by making sure that you are well as well. Trying to shift to something completely different, I am more important than other people, or my well-being is more of a priority. That's not going to happen for people who are intrinsically motivated by helping other people. But if they can come to the understanding and the belief, if I look after myself well, and I can be the best version of me to be able to help other people, and I will have more of an impact, and I'll be able to do that better. I think that is where the sweet spot is for me in regards to that particular issue.
I completely agree. I think it's really seen to be quite selfish, isn't it, to sort of look after ourselves. The other bit is to remember why we do what we do, not to use that as a method to keep going, because that's not okay. I want to help, therefore I will help. I broke. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, remember why you're doing what you're doing. Why do I want to do this job? Why do I want to be this support, and using that as the motivator as well. Because you know what, I won't be able to carry on doing this if I don't understand that maybe helping myself is going to be really crucial. And we hear it a lot with people sort of saying, yeah, but if I go off sick, then I'm letting my people that I work with down, I'm letting the people that we support down. And actually we're like, okay, I get it's going to feel like that. But what if you go off sick and don't come back because it's gone too far? You know, maybe there's this sort of understanding that we have to put the brakes on before we actually hit the wall.
It's really weird as well, isn't it, when you think about the fact that we're also talking about a sector that if they ask people what they do, they would say, oh, I'd just do this. Like, as if, like, it's nothing. It's such a weird, like, catch-22 that you're both all things to all people, but actually don't think that much of yourself because you just do this and it's just, you know, like, I only do this.
I think just is my least favourite word right now. I hear it all the time. I'm just stressed. I'm just tired. It's just this. It's just that. You know, let's just ban just from our vocabulary because it's no help, is it? It doesn't help any of us at all. Ultimately, if we're in roles that we are being with, supporting, teaching, looking after people who are in crisis or trauma, then that's not just anything. We wouldn't say it about the people that we work with, would we? Oh, it's just a kid. Oh, it's just this. They're just that. We'd be like, blimey, what can we do? How can we get stuck in to make a difference here?
If you run a car in red the entire time, it will break down. You're going to like ruin your engine. You don't go for the car when you buy a second-hand car that you know someone has been dragging around the area because that would be ridiculous. You don't want that car. The car's ruined. So I think it's an interesting analogy applicable to many areas of our life. The idea that we achieve more, that we do better by forcing ourselves to perform out of the box every single day is actually slightly ridiculous in the concept of PD.
I think that's a perfect example of what I was sort of about to transition into, and that was talking about that work culture and sort of what can the practitioners do to influence the work culture so that have more of those conversations, make the organisation more aware of its employees' well-being.
I think you've led me really nicely into the pillars there, Magda, and we're doing so much work with managers at the moment because let's not forget that managers are struggling too. You know, they can be in between the senior leadership teams, so they're carrying their staff's caseload as well as their own stuff. So for me, it's absolutely about communication and use the pillars. You know, let's think about these mismatches of burnout and let's think of how the pillars can support that. So let's not treat professional trauma and fatigue as though it's something, if we talk about it, we're going to have to do something about it. That does come up an awful lot. Let's just name it, get it out there. Everybody will understand what it is, and then we can work with it as and when it comes. Supervision or management, line management, however that happens. Kate says beautifully, you know, keep the you in it. This is in addition to caseload support. This is about how are you? What's going on for you? And again, the fear there is if I ask you, you're going to tell me, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it if you tell me. So this is about, okay, well, how are we going to support that? How are we going to cope? Which again comes back to that sort of parallel of the work that we do, doesn't it? Provide that safe space to hear. Definitely encourage that peer support. It is our absolute superpower. We are each other's power. We keep each other going. And again, I need to stress, not to the point where we make ourselves ill. The peer support is the resources we already have. So let's enjoy it. Let's do however that looks as well. That's going to take a little bit of talking about. I'll let Kate sort of dip more into the trauma-informed side of it. But again, you know, the simple things like putting out of office on, you know, managers not answering 9, 10, 12 o'clock at night, modelling what we want our team to be able to work within those boundaries. Really understand that we're not on 24-hour call. It's not possible. So I think the pillars really provide a bit of a clue there. I hope that we can, you know, work together to understand what it is and that there is no formula. What I need today is very likely to be different to what I might need in a couple of weeks. You know, 4 weeks ago, I was sat on my sofa, I'm not going to lie, and absolutely empty, done, you know, and then berating ourselves because we're doing this job, don't we? I spend all my life looking after other people. Why have I not learned yet that it's going to impact me? I think the pillars hopefully might be of some help to provide a bit of a structure.
I remember once, and I always use this example because it really fits into our self-care pillar. And the idea, as Sass has alluded to, that behaviour is communication. How is behaviour as individuals, team leaders, senior leadership, wherever you are within an organisation, how you behave informs what other people see as acceptable. And I remember I was sat in this meeting and I got all my team together and I'd done this big thing about self-care, and I was thinking, yes, look at me, lovely manager, telling you all to take your breaks and leave work on time, look after yourselves, look at me. And then one of my lovely team members, who I've still talk to you now, put her hand up and said, Kate, and said, yes, Amy. And she says, you do realise that you were working at 3 a.m. last night because you emailed us. So you just told us to do all this stuff and you didn't do any of it yourself, so why would we? Excellent point, Amy. I'm just going to go away and think about what I've done. And I know these days, this was quite some time ago, and I know that these days now I'm much more aware of that, actually, the whole email thing. We can schedule emails if we have our own timescales we need to work to that don't work with others. I know that. But I think it's symptomatic of a wider issue, isn't it? That idea that we expect others to do what we tell them and not what we do. And that is just unrealistic. We know it's unrealistic. That's why we have a saying around it. We know that if we behave in certain ways, then other people will copy us and learn from that. And it will become part, it will be subsumed into what the culture is. I remember we once did training for this group of professionals, and we were talking about this. And this woman said, you know what, this has just come to me. She said, I used to work in a team and I did exactly the same job as I do now. Exactly the same role. I just moved the same employer to a different geographical area. And said, you know what, I'm not taking my lunch breaks. I'm not leaving work on time. I'm running myself into the ground. I'm tired at weekends. She says, what you've just said has made me realise that's because everyone else does. Like, when I first started, I was so used to in my old place of work, we used to all generally leave on time. We'd go out for lunch. We'd kind of talk to each other about not putting pressure on each other. But they don't do that here. And when I tried to do it, people were a bit nonplussed by it. Constantly I stopped. So I didn't realise I was doing that. It just happened because I just kind of accepted the norm. So I think there's a real power to seeing our behaviour and the stances we choose to take, the boundaries we choose to impose as a communication to others as to what they can accept for themselves. And there's a lovely quote, which is, it's funny, you're in that, I can't remember it word for word, but what she says is that when we choose to neglect ourselves, we model to other people that neglect and abuse is acceptable. And I think that's a really good way of thinking differently around that.
Talking about permission and stuff, and that other part of training also makes me raw every time. We were working with some student social workers and they'd just gone on to their first sort of placements, and we'd got them, you know, because we really believe that if we can get this message out early, hopefully we're going to avoid these horrific statistics that we see in our sectors about burnout. They'd all been talking about their teams, and then this one student sat there and said, you know, my manager's ace. She met me on my first day. She took me for a walk around the building. She showed me where everything was. We went and had a cup of tea, you know, and she does this and she does that. And you could kind of see all the other students in the room, like sort of go, this is not my experience. And then in that first break, this student was surrounded by so what team are you on then? Because bear in mind, you know, these students were going to be looking to apply for roles. And so I think, you know, the message is, you know, that if we look after ourselves, then that's a real value, a huge value. And it keeps the team together, because I think we know that, you know, people don't leave good teams, right? You know, they stay with a good team because we need each other in this kind of work.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
Looking at self-care, what are some of the sort of small everyday things that anyone can do? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience will be saying, oh, but my schedule's really busy. I need to prioritize looking after others. Why would I look after myself and I've got barely any time? So what are the sort of the easy little things that anybody can implement in their daily routine?
I'll make a start, Kate, and then you can pick up any that I kind of miss out. And when we talk about this, I'm always really mindful. I'll never get some feedback we got in some training once, which was saying, I know that drinking water is going to be helpful, but, we have to take, self-care is healthcare. This is not about spa days, although obviously it'd be quite nice. This is about basic healthcare. Initially, we're talking about sleep, we're talking about water, we're talking about moving, and we're talking about food. That's so basic, I know, and I know everybody hates it. But if we're talking about being too busy to do that, then let's focus on sleep. If we're suffering from a horrific issue with sleep across the country, so many of my clients are sort of saying, I'm struggling with sleep. We've got to have the ability to be able to ritualize going to sleep and sleeping well. So my first 2 tips would be, really have a bit of a read round what helps you sleep, good quality sleep. Also, you're in bed anyway most of the time. So that we can't say we haven't got time for that because we're in bed anyway most of the time. And water on the desk, really tedious. But again, if we're time short, time strapped, that's a really simple one that we can use. And I guess my final consideration on that would be, to you, Kate sort of said, it doesn't have to be worthy. It has to be something that is relaxing for you, that you are able to switch off at, that you are able to enjoy. So again, taking it back to training, somebody saying, I'm mum to 2 kids, I have no help, I'm working full time. By the time I get home, get the kids to bed, all I want to do is get on the sofa and watch Netflix. And I'm like, great. So enjoy it. Enjoy it as your self-care. Don't beat yourself up for it, just own it, I guess. Those would be the simple ones that I would recommend.
You said it needs to be something relaxing or something that lets you relax. What if the thing that's going to help you relax is doing something horrible, like making a budget or spending time doing something that you've really been putting off?
For me, that's about short-term pain, long-term gain. That's about understanding that generally, unfortunately, most of the good stuff is uncomfortable to start off with because we're hoping for that long-term benefit, aren't we? And that's why change is hard, because we don't see it initially. And I think also that other thing there is people assuming that sleep is the only form of rest when it's not. And what's my rest might not be your rest, Some people jump out of planes to rest and switch off, that would send me into a tailspin. So it's personal, but yeah, if it's something that's grotty, there's a phrase called eat your frog, do what makes you uncomfortable first. And maybe a bit of accountability from somebody in the team or your family. So, okay, let's do this tonight. Then when we've done that, then we can start and feel a little bit better about it.
The one thing that we didn't mention then, Eddie, about sleep is it's actually the place that you heal from trauma. It's where your brain processes things. So in terms of wanting to buffer against vicarious trauma, it's particularly useful. But the second thing I kind of wanted to say is I think in some ways, we're asking ourselves the wrong question. Because I think that often we are bombarded by messages about what we could do for self-care. Every other headline is about how this next new exercise regime, food, diet plan is going to revolutionize your life. If that was going to happen, one of them would have worked by now, wouldn't it? As Sass says, there is no one size fits all. But I also think that a lot of this is more about not what do we do, how do we effectively make change and put it into practice? Because that is often actually the biggest difficulty. Not having an idea of what we should do, having an idea of how we actually get off our bum and do it, and don't let the fact that we're short on time, short on energy, short on motivation stop us. I would really suggest looking at habit change theory, because the research tells us around that is that personal motivation is actually not the most important factor. And the most important factor isn't how motivated you are. So if you tried before and you failed and then you've hated yourself for it and you've been that person who, after your New Year's resolutions that you were going to only eat green things and actually ended up 2 days in eating a takeaway and crying into your chocolate bar, then the message is that's really normal, because actually just relying on personal motivation to make massive personal change is not very effective. What we should be looking at is habits. What habits, what are self-care habits, not one-offs, not your spa days, not your one-off bath bomb from Lush, as nice as it might be, but what are the things you do for yourself every day or very regularly that are built into your routine that nourish you? I get up every morning and I clean my teeth. Super basic. And I'm not just boasting about my oral health. What I'm telling you is that I don't think about it, because you do that since you were a kid. You get up, you clean your teeth. If things are so ingrained into our habits and our routines that we don't have to consider them. We don't have to think, have I got the time, the energy, the resource? They're just something we fitted in and do. Then we're much more likely to continue with them. So my suggestion would be, doesn't really matter what you choose necessarily, but choose something small, choose something achievable, and ingrain it as a habit over time. Looking at habit change theory as to what actually will make you successful. And because then, if you really want to enjoy works, maybe in 2 years' time you can be. I don't personally want to be. Quite enjoy cake and I like sitting down and watching telly. But you can get where you want to be, but it will take you a long time and it will have to be done incrementally for it to be realistic. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to get there by next month. And our human nature hates that.
I have a really bad habit of doing things that I enjoy. And because I enjoy them, I want to be good at them. So then they become a goal and therefore stop being self-care and start being something that's like Duolingo. I've got a 460-something day streak on Duolingo and I'm in the Diamond League. And now the idea of not continuing with any of those things is genuinely stressful. But it was just something that I do at the bus stop. Do you know what I mean?
I think there are real links there, joking aside, on a very serious note, where self-care can turn into a form of self-harm. And I think it's really important that we keep it all balanced. We've only got to talk about booze, coffee, cream cakes, as and actually it can become stuff that tips the balance between soothing us and actually damaging us. And that awareness, again, is about self, isn't it? It's not just about what can impact us or how. It's also about us. It's about starting to learn about us and knowing when you need to leave your phone switched off at the bottom of your bag or lock your apps. Talking to an aged old Candy Crusher back in the day. These things do become a way of life, don't they?
Now that we've touched across all the different pillars, what sort of positive changes have you observed from watching practitioners implementing this framework? Like, have you had anybody come back to you and tell you, this has really changed this, and now my manager is talking to me about this a lot more, and so on?
I know Kate knows what I'm going to say here, but, actually we do regularly get people messaging us and saying, I've left my job. That can feel quite brutal. But actually, if it's making us ill, then maybe that's what needs to happen, or change a role, or change direction. And so yeah, that's one thing that's happened. But we really find that it's the small stuff that counts. So that we were delivering a few weeks ago and we sort of challenged very gently, because, that's the way that we work, to maybe think of something and see how far they got. And I think the biggest changes that we see, Magda, is maybe it's less about self-care habits, but more about watching people go, oh, okay, I get it. Now I know why I'm struggling. Now I know why this is happening. Now I know I can put a name to what I'm experiencing, why I just give up. I don't care anymore, maybe, or they don't care anymore. So I think that's the biggest change that I see, that I love, that by bringing this stuff to folks, we regularly hear, I'm not going mad. It's not me. I'm not going mad. This just makes perfect sense. I think that's the first step, Magda, if I'm honest. Then the second step is any changes that we can see moving forward. We're certainly seeing more organisations sit up and take notice, which I'm grateful for. When we started SelfCare Psychology 7 years ago, we never thought anybody would want to bring us in to do this kind of stuff with their staff, because it was seen as really lightweight and fluffy. And, we unfortunately named the business before the self-care sort of epidemic took off, unfortunately, because as you've heard, we see it very much as a healthcare perspective. But yeah, seeing more organisations want to spread the word, those are the changes. You guys inviting us to talk about stuff like this, getting the message out to people, that's vital. But it's the small changes that I love. I don't know if Kate would agree, but it's when people come back a week later and go, yeah, I have taken my lunch to work all week and thoroughly enjoyed it and feel better for it and feel more in control, because I think that's what an awful lot of it is about. I don't know what you think, Kate.
Sass is absolutely right. That is about people understanding themselves better is a huge part of it. But she's also right that we do see people come back, especially if we see people over like a period of time, because that's when I think you really get that feedback, because you see them from 1 month and a month later and you get to kind of explore that. Does this make a difference? And it does. If people are willing to pick that up and run with it, and try and make small changes. Would that people saying things like, I'm just taking the dog out every day, or I am making those 10 minutes to myself, which made me think, what did I move in me? And I started to a new skill or a new class or learn something different. So we really do get people making those small changes that make a big difference. We do get some real small changes made that people feel have a positive impact on them.
You kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about self-care, and that's sort of like the myths and misconceptions. So are there any myths and misconceptions around sort of professional trauma, burnout, all those different things that you talked about that you kind of keep being challenged with in your profession?
I think there's a bit of an argument about self-care being selfish versus collective care, and I think we need both. I think it's really important that we can't look after ourselves and each other if we don't embrace all of this, and actually resistance to it, to me, although I get it, it is unhelpful. We do it for our service users, we do it for our clients, we do it for our students. We wouldn't even think of saying to a service user or a student or a client, no, you mustn't look after yourself, you must look after everybody else first. I mean, we just wouldn't do that. We know that that's not helpful. I think the other thing is this narrative around burnout on social media, and you burn out in 3 years, 5 years. What are we doing to ourselves? Kate and I are working alongside new practitioners, seasoned, experienced practitioners with 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years experience, who have never burnt out, who have never got to the point where they've had to walk away. They've kind of innately, or as Kate says, common sense, have worked out how to look after themselves and each other. If we could really get rid of this burnout being inevitable, that would be really helpful, because what's the point in trying if we're just going to accept that it's something that's going to help us? It does not have to happen. We do not have to burn out. No, we can't control our organisations. But if we're sort of saying, I have no autonomy at all, then that just feels like a little bit helpless to me, a little bit hopeless even.
Aside from what Sass has already said, I think my biggest myth, actually, when you look at the burnout narrative, when you look at all this stuff around stress and people leaving the workplace, would be that actually our work is a negative for us. The idea that we don't get stuff from it too. And I think that links in with the rewards of the work that we do. Because you know what? As much as these things are a risk, and we absolutely want to raise awareness of them, we want people to think about them more, to know about them, understand them. We also want people to understand and know that having a life where you have lived it with meaning and purpose, where you have followed your passions, where you have done the things that fulfill you, and for many of us, a lot of fulfillment comes from helping other people. That is the best way to live a happy life. All of the research that you look at, everything that you look at, happiness is a nebulous word and a concept, but anything around happiness, around satisfaction, and around well-being tells you that one of the most important things you can do to achieve those states is to live a life full of meaning and purpose. And if we really care about our roles, if we're passionate about them, and we're passionate about the difference that we can make, then clearly that is going to enrich our lives. And on the other hand, we talk about compassion fatigue. There's compassion satisfaction. There's what we do this for. That lovely, warm, fuzzy feeling that you get that makes, gives you goose pimples or makes your hair stand on end slightly. When something goes really well, when you make a change for somebody or you see them make a change that you have supported them to do, that's huge. That's massive. That's that child meeting that milestone or doing that thing that you've been supporting them and egging them on, and that's what we do this for. And that stuff is absolute gold dust. It is impactful for us on both a psychological and a physiological level. It does amazing things for us, both for our mental health, for our physical health, for our hormones, for everything. Those experiences are everything. So I think my biggest myth would be that the work that we do is only harmful to us. It's not. It can be the most magical, rewarding, enriching experience, but we just have to be careful and we have to be mindful of our well-being if we want to experience those rewards.
And that's true, but how do you know when things are really good? Because sometimes, again, I know from my own experience, good stress is still stress. So when things are really exciting, still means that there's a period of change where you've got loads of wins that are happening. It can be sometimes even more difficult to have that awareness that things are stressful, because everything seems really positive. So how do you stay aware of the stressors?
How do you not get overexcited and just keep wanting more?
Yeah.
It's just about keeping in check with yourself, keeping in touch with yourself, keeping on checking in, am I doing this stuff? I need to do this stuff all the time, so I have it. I don't need to do it last week from being crisis. Because if we only do it when we think we're in crisis, then we're going to have problems with that.
I think there's also something about intention. I think there's also something about knowing and hoping that there is stuff that's good for us. One of the most important things for me, Kate and I have got really excited looking at the rewards of our work. Yes, stress does have its benefits, but it does have that physical impact on us, doesn't it? That physicality, awareness of that. And actually when it's all going a little bit too much, that's a really good indicator of that. But, if we're talking about the work that we do specifically, then for me, it's about that post-traumatic growth, which is the opposite of trauma, where we see growth from people because of what we've experienced. We look at clients and we're like, I can't believe you've done that. If we feel trauma vicariously, then we can feel that resilience vicariously. When we sit with somebody and we're like, I don't know how you've done it. We must have all been there where we've sat with folks and we're just like blown away by their, I don't even want to use strength because I don't want that to be seen as just a positive thing, but that ability that they've coped and that they've got through stuff. And I think as a team, if we're talking about how to sort of work that into our team, then I think there's loads that we can do with each other to encourage experiencing that compassion satisfaction. Okay, what went well for us last week? And I'm not talking about, that was a really nice experience, we did that. I'm talking about, do you know what? This was amazing. This client let me through the door. This student let me sit with them. They've never let anybody do that before. This stuff that is so important because we're talking about the people that we work with achievements, not ours. We're not talking about, I did this, that and the other. We're talking about, I sat with this person and this is what was going on. This is phenomenal. I genuinely get goosebumps when I hear that and when I experience that. And I fully support goosebumps being a part of compassion satisfaction.
You were looking for the word that wasn't strength. And I noticed that you very deftly avoided using the word resilience, which I think for a number of our listeners, they would probably have been shouting along because that for them would have been the missing word. I'm guessing because it's such a natural word to put into that sentence that there's a reason you didn't use that word.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting how I used it when I was talking about being with the people that we work with and admiring and being part of their resilience, but actually using it in ourselves. It's in no way disrespectful of all of the research and academics who work so hard on resilience, because it very much has a place in our work. But we are hearing so much about people being beaten up by it. You must be resilient. You must go and get resilient. Why aren't you resilient? Go on resilience training. And it's a bit like burnout and stress and all of these other phrases that we hear, that it's kind of commercialised and used as a way to try and get more from us. And that's not what resilience is about. Resilience is about the ability to go with what we're trying to cope with, not to stand up to it and make out that nothing's going to knock us down, because that's just not human. That's just not possible. And I think, if we're going to end anywhere, then remembering that we are all human, that we all hurt, that we all have joy, but we're all completely unique. And Kate and I hope we would never try and tell people stuff. It's always about offering ideas, thoughts, concepts. If it makes sense for you, then let's go with it. Let's talk about it. Let's make it real, so that we can carry on doing the jobs that we love, because it's criminal that we're losing people simply because we're not encouraging them to look after themselves or each other. It's that simple in my mind.
We'll be finishing off now, so if you could let our audience know where they can find out more about what you do.
Well, that's very generous of you. I think, the models are on the website. that people can look at. There's also a resources tab on the website at the moment. There's got a lot of free, like seriously properly free, not like pay £1 a month, and it is seriously free and accessible. So please do access it. There's a boundaries exercise that's Kate designed, which is interactive, but we're currently bringing all our resources up to another level, really. So they're there for free. There's some self-care cards you can download, print off, laminate. Love a good laminate. Find it very therapeutic myself. But also, getting on the socials, just joining the conversation, because the only changes that we're ever going to be able to make are together. It's as simple as that. And starting to understand that this is about early intervention lifestyle, not crisis management,
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.